myself into retina-bending realms of speed. Welcome to the new, and this is a massive deal, the new 992 generation Porsche 911 Turbo S, no less. Massive deal. Let's face it, as part of the Porsche lineage and model range, Turbo sits as the big daddy. The S, the even bigger daddy, with the slightly larger muscles, and certainly outside of the GT variants of Porsche models, this is the flagship. This is the big daddy. And just how big is this daddy? Well, the incremental margins, which are synonymous with the evolution of Porsches of years gone by, have been somewhat augmented further than expected with this car. Yes, it's built on the 992 platform, which already from the get-go, when I first drove the Carrera for the very first time, the chassis development that they've done on this car is outstanding. It feels like it's already been through the GT division, as it were. The way this thing rides, which we shall get onto shortly, is nothing short of remarkable. However, there are some areas where Porsche have evolved things much further than they usually do, namely, and this isn't an area which I ever expected Porsche needed to enhance further, but this has the biggest jump in power of any generation of 911. And what does that mean? Well, the car is now 650 brake horsepower, meaning that the Turbo S has been increased by 70 horsepower more versus the previous generation 991 car. What that translates to is the ability to dispatch traffic like something from an alternative universe. The way, the traction, don't forget, we've still got that familiar four-wheel drive platform. It is all-wheel drive. It's 650 horsepower and 590 pounds-feet of torque. Pounds-feet, not newton meters. That's enough twisting effort to warrant your own tarmacer behind you, just to make sure that the road is smooth after you've left it behind. The grip levels are outstanding. You can plant foot in second gear, rolling at a pretty steady cruise, and it will apply 100% of traction with 0% slip. Not a single light or hesitation or deviation from its intended trajectory. It is bonkers. So, what I think we should do is work our way down through the primary attributes of a sports car and discuss what this very exciting new car is all about. Starting with the heart and soul of any car, really, that is the engine. So this is now a 3.8 litre twin turbocharged engine, as I touched on briefly, 650 brake horsepower, sir. Now, the car is coming in just over 1,600 kilograms, so as the years go by, Porsche seem to get wider. The stance of this thing is ridiculous. It's got the squattest derriere that I think I've seen from any 911 so far. So yes, heavier and wider, but as a result, we also have wider, stickier tyres, and it has staggered alloys. So 20-inch at the front, 21-inch at the rear, and that translates to a conservative 0 to 60 of 2.5 seconds. I'm saying 2.5 because it's 0 to 62 in 2.6. So I think I'm justified in saying that it's 2.5 to 60. Porsche are known for being conservative with their own performance figures. So it'll go on to do over 200, in fact it's over 210 miles an hour. And so what do those numbers translate to? Well, despite the fact that the car has become a tad heavier, and that isn't actually Porsche's fault. As the car industry evolves, so do the rules and regulations surrounding crash test safety and more recently CO2 emissions. And so the technology which has to be built into these cars to make them safer and less polluting adds weight, but also the demand for mod cons, new tech, luxurious components on the interior. These things also add to the overall weight. So around about 1,600 kilograms. That being said, what do those numbers actually translate to? The real diaphragm bending performance is the mid-range. I mean, what am I now? Fifth gear, got my sports exhaust on, and actually for a turbocharged engine, I think it sounds great. So here we are, third gear. horsepower, it's just bonkers. The speed, the performance, the traction, it's breathtaking actually. What has always been the unique selling point of the 911 Turbo is that it was the original daily driver supercar. And now it's about as super as it's gonna get. To try and draw a comparison in terms of the overall performance and what it's like to experience the thrust that this thing generates, it's much more akin to something like a McLaren 720S. It has that level of boost. It's just crazy, and yet it has back seats. Granted that they are probably more appropriate for children, but it does have back seats. Those back seats fold down flat, and you can then utilize the parcel shelf and the extra space that comes from folding down those seats. And then you can dial its driver modes down. So right now I'm in sports. If you put it into normal, everything gets disproportionately tranquil. I mean, I know I'm stating the obvious here, but to say that you could live with this daily, that's the whole point of it. It's so graceful along the road because it has so much torque. The way that you interact with it when you're looking to relax and just cruise, it's just effortless. It makes you feel good. I can imagine doing a very long journey in this and stepping out the other end going, I would actually like to turn around and do that all over again. So not only do I feel fresh, but the driving dynamics when you find yourself on a proper good country road like this, the flick of a switch, you can put it into Sport Plus, it gets taut, you can feel those dampers tighten up, and before you know it, well, just listen to this. God! Oh, it's so composed in the braking. And that brings me round to brakes, actually. So not only has the size of the brakes increased, so have the calipers. These are now 10 piston calipers on the front of this car. The actual carbon discs themselves have grown. The stopping force and the stopping power on this, it's like someone's throwing an anchor out into the tarmac behind you and dragging you to a halt. And under braking, it's so composed, there's no squirm, slam on those brakes, and it's equally composed when it's dragging physics to a halt. Everything about it is just so well engineered, and I think this is the great thing about Porsche is it's just decades of evolution, of learning, motorsport, filtering that relentless pursuit of perfection in engineering into a package so capable, just fills you as a driver full of so much confidence behind the wheel. Now, what has been interesting and cool is that the gearbox in this is specific to this car. Namely, it's been re-engineered because of the additional torque that this car now has. Of course, the standard Carrera and Carrera S these days is a turbocharged engine, but it's not classed as a Porsche Turbo, despite the fact that they are turbocharged. But with this, the amount of torque that it has, Porsche have had to re-engineer the gearbox entirely. And when they were at it, they also developed specific gearing ratios. When this thing revs out to 7 and you pull on that cog and it pulls that next gear, the linear, relentless pull, there is zero break in the surge of energy which is unleashed from under your right foot. The torque is palpable. It almost sits behind the horsepower. You can feel independently the horsepower you're playing with and that thick, tangible ball of energy, which is the torque under your right foot, and you can play with that. And as you snap back on that next upshift, there's just seamless, relentless pull. It's more like the car is being dragged down the road by a very strong industrial magnet. Surge of energy. There is zero friction. Now let's talk about steering and turning and steering feel. As of the 991 generation of Porsches, steering went from hydraulically assisted to entirely electric. The early cars, you could kind of tell. This thing, I mean, if I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know. It just feels so dialed in. The front and the nose on this, the way it turns in. The concept that Porsche will eventually do a GT3, and no doubt at the end of the line of this car, a GT2 or GT2 RS, really plays with me. It actually scares me a bit, the amount of performance which will be extracted from this platform. turn in, everything about it. It's not only incredibly impressive, but the best trick is the amount of confidence. And really, for the road, you're not going to get anywhere near it. But if you do find yourself on a stretch of road where you can explore just a margin of this car's performance, what you'll be able to get out of it, it's up there with true top tier levels of supercar performance. It's something which is quite rightly pitched at something that you can live with every single day. And I think that is its greatest trick. So one thing that you might be able to detect, and it might be slightly exaggerated on this microphone because it does pick up the ambient noise, but fat tyres on this, and there is a degree of road noise more than you might expect. Having said that, it differs dramatically based on the tarmac surface which you're driving on. I drove here from Porsche HQ in Reading, taking really smooth motorways, and on a motorway as a cruiser it doesn't sound anything like this. This just so happens to be a pretty aggressive road surface. But having said that, I will still say that there is probably a bit more tyre and road noise than you might expect. Now, of course, if you are planning on living with one of these daily, the ride comfort and quality is of paramount importance. Now, it's kind of strange this, because at higher speeds, I'm feeling that they've done a remarkable job of ironing out any creases and bumps in the road. You're very aware that it's obviously fundamentally a stiff platform, but stiff and harsh or sharp are very different things. It's never crashy, it's never an abrupt bump. It does a very good job of ironing things out when you've got a bit of a flow going on. Weirdly, at slower speeds, and this only applies if the road surface sucks, but at slower speeds it feels stiffer or harsher than it does at higher speeds. I wouldn't say it's something to put you off, but when this is in its operating window, is to state the obvious, when it's operating best, drop it down to sort of village speed, and if that village just so happens to be cursed with a crap road surface, it will be highlighted more than at speed, if that makes sense. And then of course this has rear wheel steer. To recap, chances are everyone's heard of how this works now, but at higher speed the rear wheels turn a slight degree in the same direction as the front wheels in order to generate more stability at higher speed. At lower speeds, the rear wheels turn at a slight angle in the opposite direction of the front wheels. The agility, that really for me, in terms of driving dynamics, is one of the biggest evolutions in car handling in recent years, and that's also something that really helps to keep in check the ever-growing weight of cars. On the road, if you compare it with 911s of old, okay, it feels a bigger car, but when you throw it into a corner, it's just Benz physics. For a four-wheel drive car, the agility there is excellent. It's hard actually to really come up with anything truly negative about it. One thing, and you can't criticize it really, because it's not trying to be anything else but a very high performance, heavily turbocharged car. The sound isn't exactly exotic. If you put it into sport mode on the downshifts, see if we can get it to do it. Yeah, there are some, listen, there you go. There are some burbles, some pops and bangs on the lift-off overrun, which is nice. That's only with the optional sports exhaust. They are there, and I do like that, and it's enough to remind me that I am in something special. But sound isn't exactly exotic, but it's not trying to be that. The majority of the time you're in this to live with as a daily driver, and then when you do find yourself on a road like this, you can destroy it. I mean, beyond any, honestly, you would need some serious top tier supercars to know where this thing went. The performance per pound, I don't know really. You'd have to be up in the £250,000 thoroughbred supercar stuff. The way this thing destroys a back road is absurd. Yeah, just absolutely bonkers in fact. So if you look at it as an overall package and then think that it is very much poised as a daily driver, you can excuse it for not having the most exciting soundtrack. I mean, even if you get in a GT2 RS, the sound doesn't exactly set you alight, and this doesn't sound much different. It's a bit more muted because there is sound deadening in the car. But I like that barbel. I do like the overrun, the pops and bangs on the exhaust. It's cool. That's what us little boys like, isn't it? Exhaust sounds. Surge! Absolute rocket propulsion. SpaceX who? This thing. So there we have it. At the beginning of this, I was making a big deal of it being a big deal because it is a big deal. It's not every day that you get the flagship 911 launching, and certainly not getting to experience the first drive on your home turf. You know, these cars come around every 7 or 8 years, and when they do, they've got such cult following. They're such an iconic car that it's you know, something to behold and something to celebrate. And thankfully, ultimately, I'm happy to report that it's probably the best driver's version of the 911 Turbo yet. Steering feel fantastic, brakes, 10-pot calipers, immense performance, face bending. It's like my cheeks are made of soft putty. When you depress that throttle in second gear, in fact any gear, they sort of bend around your cheekbones and you find facial contortions you never thought possible when you look in the mirror. That is a party trick in itself. Traction is absurd, active aero. Yes, it's a bit bigger and a bit heavier, but the extra power and rear wheel steering helps keep it in check like you wouldn't believe. And refinement, that's the last thing I'd like to touch on. When you get in this, it's very evident that Porsche have been building cars for decades, because the refinement of it, and these are things that are very hard to get through on camera. There is a tautness, a distinct torsion that you feel throughout the chassis, throughout the steering. Just listen for a second. Not a squeak, not a rattle, not a shuffle. There is nothing. It is engineering advanced. And I think that, again, is why they're such a compelling car, because they've evolved them to such a degree. Everything just feels so well screwed together. That's the sort of basic way of saying that the build quality is insane. Really great. Obviously now beautiful multimedia interface here, touch screen, Apple CarPlay, wireless Apple CarPlay. All of the switch gear feels great. Everything that you interact with has knurling on the edges of it, which just makes things nice to touch and feel and fondle. My favourite cup holders have been reduced to one. The origami cup holders are now available on the passenger side, and I've got one down here which is equally well engineered, but I just loved how the originals, or we'll say the originals, the one in the 991 generation, and 997 in fact, used to retract away into the dashboard. Yes, and then just plush leather, beautiful materials. This one's optioned with the Alcantara steering wheel, cool tactile feel on the paddle shifters. Desperate requirement for one of these in my life. Well done, Porsche. Welcome back, 911 Turbo. At the beginning of this, I was making a big deal of it being a big deal because it's a big deal. It's not like a new generation of Porsche Turbo comes around every day. In fact, it's probably every 7 or 8 years. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please leave your questions and comments below. If you're enjoying the channel, please like the video and be sure to subscribe. And then when you do subscribe, hit the little bell, because you'll be the first to get an alert to when